Fidelio, Pope Francis's dog, continues his daily vigil at St. Peter's Basilica, even 3 days after the passing of his beloved owner. With eyes reflecting unwavering loyalty, the golden-coated dog has won hearts around the world. His devotion transcends human understanding, becoming a symbol of a love that not even death could interrupt. A story of extraordinary fidelity that moves multitudes. Prepare for a journey that will touch your heart. Subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. In the small, bustling St. Peter's Square, where crowds of pilgrims gather daily to glimpse the majesty of the basilica, there is a silent presence that has become part of the sacred landscape. A golden-coated dog, with deep brown eyes like wells of crystallized honey, sits daily before the enormous edifice. His eyes, windows to a soul that seems to understand more than any human could imagine, fix on the main balcony with an intensity that defies rational explanation. It is as if time has frozen for him, as if each minute is just another grain of sand in the infinite hourglass of his weight. This is Fidelio, not a simple pet, but the faithful companion of the late Pope Francis and a living symbol of a devotion that transcends the limits of human comprehension. Tourists pass by, some stop, take photos, others offer treats or try to pet him. He gently accepts the offerings, briefly inclines his head to the touch, but his eyes never leave that balcony. What is Fidelio waiting for? Who is he searching for with such persistence that not even the passing of the seasons can shake? The story we are about to tell is not just about a dog. It is about a bond that defies time, death, and the limitations we believe exist between different species. It is about how love, in its purest form, can persist even when reason tells us it should have extinguished. Fidelio came into Pope Francis's life during one of his walks through the humbler neighborhoods of Rome. It was an autumn day, golden. Leaves covered the narrow streets, and the leader of the Catholic Church, always inclined to break protocols to be closer to the needy, walked discreetly accompanied only by 2 security guards. That was when Pope Francis spotted a scene that stopped him immediately. A thin puppy covered in mud, drinking water from a dirty puddle. The Pope approached slowly so as not to startle the animal. The puppy lifted his head, looked directly at the man in white and, against all expectations, did not run away. Instead, he staggered towards him and sat at his feet, as if recognizing something special in that stranger. It was an encounter that many would call predestined. A moment of connection so deep that the security guards, men trained to remain impassive, could not contain their emotion as they witnessed the scene. Against all centuries-old traditions and protocols, the Pope decided that this small abandoned being would find a home in the Vatican. Thus was born a friendship that would charm the world in the following years, and which now, 3 days after the pontiff's passing from this world, continues to move and intrigue everyone who witnesses Fidelio's tireless vigil. Sister Maria Consolata, a 78-year-old religious sister responsible for the Vatican gardens, was the first to notice the signs. On that misty morning, when the first news about the Pope's health began to circulate through the sacred precincts, Fidelio showed unusual behavior. The dog, normally calm and affectionate, refused to eat. He remained sitting in the corridor leading to the papal apartments, occasionally emitting a low whimper, almost a lament. "He knows," the sister murmured to herself, feeling a chill run down her aged spine. "Somehow, he senses what is to come." Doctors came and went in a hurry, their expressions growing darker as the hours passed. The world outside still did not know the gravity of the situation, but within those historical walls the weight of the inevitable began to make itself felt, and Fidelio, like a faithful sentinel, didn't budge from his post. When the great bell of St. Peter's Basilica finally tolled that afternoon of April 21st, 2025, announcing the sad news that would instantly spread throughout the world, the death of Pope Francis at 88, a victim of a stroke aggravated by heart failure, Fidelio raised his head and let out a long, penetrating howl that echoed through the marble corridors. It was not a common dog sound. It was a lament that seemed to carry the full weight of loss, an expression of pain so human that it made the cardinals present exchange silent, respectful glances. The funeral was attended by millions around the world. St. Peter's Square, filled with weeping faithful, transformed into a sea of lit candles. And there was Fidelio, sitting silently beside the coffin throughout the ceremony. No one dared to remove him. There was something in the dignity of that animal, in the way his eyes never left the serene face of his friend, that commanded respect even from the most traditionalists. When the coffin began to be carried into St. Peter's Basilica, something happened that would be etched in collective memory. Fidelio followed the procession as far as he was allowed, then sat at the entrance as if he understood the boundaries he had to respect. And there he remained all night, motionless like a golden statue, keeping vigil from a distance. The next day, when the staff arrived, they expected to find the dog exhausted, perhaps having finally yielded to tiredness and gone to seek comfort in some familiar corner of the Vatican. But Fidelio had changed position. He was now sitting in front of the basilica, eyes fixed on the balcony from where the Pope used to give his blessing. And so began his vigil, a wait that would continue for days, weeks, months, and eventually years. The first few weeks were the hardest for those who had grown fond of Fidelio. They tried everything to distract him, to make him resume his normal routine. Sister Maria Consolata, who had developed a special affection for the animal from the beginning, brought him his favorite treats, tried to engage him in games that used to cheer him up. All in vain. Fidelio accepted the food, allowed brief petting, but soon returned to his post, to his watchful gaze directed at the empty balcony. "It's as if he's waiting," Cardinal Bonfiglio, known for his stern demeanor and initially opposed to the presence of a dog in the sacred precincts, commented one day, "Waiting for something we cannot see or understand." Fidelio's behavior did not go unnoticed by visitors. Soon, tourists began to notice the dog, who remained motionless for hours, with an expression that many described as almost human in its sadness. The first photos began to circulate on social media, accompanied by emotional captions about the dog who waits for the Pope. The press was quick to pick up the story. First, there were small notes in local newspapers, then reports in larger outlets. "Loyalty Beyond Death" was the headline of an important Italian newspaper, accompanied by a picture of Fidelio looking at the balcony with the majestic basilica in the background. The story touched hearts around the world. Soon, people were traveling specifically to see the faithful dog with their own eyes. With the sudden increase in visitors, the Vatican faced a dilemma. Some more conservative members of the Curia suggested that Fidelio be removed, arguing that an animal was diverting attention from the true spiritual purpose of the place. Others argued that the loyalty shown by the dog was, in itself, a lesson in devotion that echoed the deepest Christian values. The internal dispute could have continued indefinitely had it not been for an incident that changed everything. During night, an important celebration, with the basilica packed with faithful, Fidelio, who usually remained quiet during ceremonies, began to bark persistently, running towards a specific area of the building. Security guards tried to restrain him, but the dog was uncontrollable, something completely out of his usual behavior. Intrigued, some staff went to investigate the area and discovered serious structural cracks that had gone unnoticed in regular inspections. Engineers later confirmed that the structure could have collapsed during the ceremony, potentially causing a disaster of great proportions. The miracle of Fidelio, as it was quickly dubbed, echoed far beyond the walls of the Vatican. For the thousands of faithful present that day, there was no doubt. The dog had been a divine instrument. Similar stories from Italian Catholic traditions were resurrected. Tales of animals that, over the centuries, had inexplicably intervened to prevent tragedies in churches and monasteries. The perception of Fidelio changed dramatically after this event. Cardinal Buonfiglio, previously his biggest critic, became a staunch defender of the dog's presence. "Perhaps we are being taught by the most unlikely of creatures," he declared during a meeting. "Who are we to question the instruments God chooses?" Meanwhile, Sister Maria Consolata, now 79 and with increasingly fragile health, continued to be Fidelio's primary caregiver. Every morning, regardless of the weather, she walked slowly to where the dog kept his vigil, bringing him food and water. Often she sat beside him in silence, sharing moments of contemplation that needed no words. It was during one of these moments, on a particularly clear and cold morning, that she noticed a change in Fidelio's behavior. For the first time in almost 6 months, the dog completely diverted his attention from the balcony. His ears perked up, his body tensed, and he fixed his gaze on a specific spot in the crowd forming in the square. Following the direction of Fidelio's gaze, the sister saw an elderly gentleman, frail in appearance but with a dignified posture. There was something familiar about him, a resemblance she couldn't immediately place. Before she could reflect further, something extraordinary happened. Fidelio leaped up and ran towards the stranger, something he hadn't done for any visitor in all those months. The visitor, as surprised as everyone else around, stood motionless as the dog approached. When Fidelio reached him, he didn't jump or show excitement. Instead, he sat down calmly at his feet and offered his paw, as if in a formal greeting. "I've never seen him before," the man stammered, visibly moved and confused. The scene attracted immediate attention. Security guards approached, concerned about the sudden change in the animal's behavior. Sister Maria Consolata, moving as fast as her aged legs allowed, also approached. "Forgive me," she said to the stranger, "but you must be very special. Fidelio hasn't done this with anyone else since the Holy Father's passing," the man finished, with an accent that revealed his origins from northern Italy. "I am Pietro Bergoglio, second cousin of His Holiness." The silence that followed was broken only by the collective gasp of the people around, who had stopped to watch the scene. The resemblance, now that he had identified himself, was obvious. The same gentle eyes, the facial features that, despite the age difference, echoed those of the late pontiff. News of the meeting spread like wildfire. In a matter of hours, journalists swarmed St. Peter's Square, all eager to document the miracle of recognition, as it was already being called. For many faithful, there was no rational explanation. How could a dog recognize the kinship between two people he had never seen together? Could this be another demonstration of the extraordinary connection Fidelio shared with Pope Francis? Pietro Bergoglio, a retired doctor who lived a discreet life away from the spotlight, suddenly found himself at the center of a media storm. Reluctant at first, he eventually agreed to a brief interview, during which he explained that he had never had close contact with his illustrious cousin, Pope Francis, after the latter's elevation to the papacy. "We come from a distant branch of the family. Our last meeting was at a family funeral decades ago," he explained, still visibly shaken by Fidelio's reaction. "I can't explain why this animal came to me. Maybe it's the genes, the familiar scent, or maybe something that transcends our scientific understanding." In the days that followed, a new routine formed. Pietro visited the Vatican daily, and Fidelio divided his time between looking at the balcony and sitting beside the Pope's cousin. For those who witnessed it, it was as if the dog had found a fragile compromise between his eternal vigil and a new bond that somehow connected him to the past. Sister Maria Consolata observed everything with a mixture of joy and melancholy. "It's as if God sent a consolation," she confided to a colleague, "not just for Fidelio, but for all of us who feel the loss." While this new dynamic was establishing itself, another situation was unfolding behind the scenes. The growing number of pilgrims coming specifically to see Fidelio was causing logistical concerns. Lines formed, people waited for hours just to take a photo with the dog. Some even brought belongings to be blessed by the animal's touch, a practice that alarmed ecclesiastical authorities. Cardinal Buonfiglio, now convinced of Fidelio's symbolic importance, found himself in a delicate position. On the one hand, he recognized the inspiring value of the story. On the other, he feared that the situation could veer towards something close to idolatry. "We must remember that, however special this animal is, he is just a creature of God, like all of us," he declared during a meeting with other cardinals. "We cannot allow admiration to turn into something that contradicts our fundamental teachings." The proposed solution was to create specific times for visits to Fidelio, thus trying to organize the flow of people. but implementing this measure proved more difficult than expected. The dog, after all, was not an object of exhibition that could be placed and removed at will. He maintained his own routine, his moments of vigil, his periods of rest. It was in the midst of this controversy that an unexpected proposal emerged. Charles Blackwood, an American billionaire known for his empire of theme resorts, offered an astronomical sum to the Vatican in exchange for Fidelio. His intention, explained in a formal letter addressed to the Secretariat of State of the Vatican, was to create a permanent exhibition called Eternal Loyalty in his new religious theme resort in Florida. Millions of people who will never have the opportunity to visit Rome will be able to witness this inspiring story, Blackwood argued in his proposal. The donated funds would be directed exclusively to the charitable works previously supported by His Holiness. The offer, while tempting from a financial standpoint, created a deep division within the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Some argued that the resources could benefit countless, needy people around the world. Others considered the proposal an unacceptable commercialization of something that had become sacred in its simplicity. Sister Maria Consolata, upon becoming aware of the situation, felt a determination she hadn't experienced in years. Despite her advanced age and relatively modest position in the hierarchy, she requested an audience with Cardinal Buonfiglio. To her surprise, she was received immediately. "Eminence," she said in a firm voice, though her hands trembled slightly. "Fidelio is not an object we can sell or transfer. He chose to be here. He chose his vigil. I believe we should respect that choice, just as we would respect the vocation of any being dedicated to serving in this sacred place." The cardinal watched the elderly sister for a long moment before responding. There was a new respect in his gaze, as if he finally saw beyond the frail figure before him. "Do you really believe an animal can have a vocation, sister?" he asked, not with sarcasm but with genuine curiosity. "I believe God speaks through all his creatures, Eminence, and I believe we must be humble enough to listen, even when the message comes from where we least expect it." Her simple answer, devoid of complex theological arguments, touched something deep in the cardinal. That same afternoon, he convened an emergency meeting to discuss Blackwood's proposal. News of the offer, inevitably, leaked to the press. In a matter of hours, social media was flooded with the hashtag, "Fidelio is not for sale." People of different creeds and nationalities protested against the idea of removing the dog from his vigil post. What no one expected was the reaction of Pietro Bergoglio, the discreet retired doctor, who until then had stayed on the sidelines of controversies, formally requested a chance to speak before the cardinals who would decide Fidelio's fate. "I do not come as a relative of a man who occupied the throne of St. Peter," he declared simply. "I come as someone who witnessed something extraordinary. This dog, for reasons I don't fully understand, recognized something in me of the man he loved. If we remove Fidelio from this place, we will be cutting the last living link he has with his past, with his purpose." Pietro's words, devoid of elaborate rhetoric, carried the weight of authenticity. At the end of the meeting, Cardinal Buonfiglio announced the decision. Blackwood's offer would be politely refused. Fidelio would remain in the Vatican, where his heart clearly chose to be. The news was received with joy by the faithful dog's admirers. Sister Maria Consolata, upon hearing the decision, knelt in her small chapel and wept tears of gratitude. For her, Fidelio's permanence represented something greater than the story of a dedicated animal. It was a reminder that, in an increasingly pragmatic world, there was still room to recognize the value of bonds that transcend rational explanations. What no one could predict, however, was that a new ordeal awaited on the horizon. 8 months after Fidelio's vigil began, Vatican staff noticed that the dog was slower. His breathing sometimes labored for no apparent reason. Sister Maria Consolata was the first to realize he was leaving food on his plate, something that had never happened before. Dr. Marco Rossi, a respected veterinarian in Rome and a volunteer for years in animal care programs, was called to examine Fidelio. After a series of tests, the diagnosis came as a shock. The dog suffered from a severe heart condition that required urgent, specialized treatment. Without intervention, I fear he only has a few months, the veterinarian explained, clearly shaken. We need to start treatment immediately and consider the possibility of surgery. News of Fidelio's illness spread quickly, causing a wave of commotion that surprised even those already accustomed to the dog's popularity. Spontaneously, groups of faithful began organizing vigil of prayer in various parts of the world. Brilliant people of all ages gathered in St. Peter's Square, candles lit, reciting prayers for the animal's recovery. What followed was even more extraordinary. A fundraising campaign to cover Fidelio's specialized treatment reached its goal in less than 24 hours. Contributions came from every continent, often accompanied by emotional messages about how the dog's story had touched lives. "My mother is in the terminal stage of cancer," wrote a donor from the United States. "Fidelio's story is the last thing that makes her smile every day. Please save this four-legged angel." Pietro Bergoglio, who had become a constant presence in the Vatican since his encounter with Fidelio, offered to personally oversee all the treatment. "I have medical experience, and more importantly, he seems comfortable with my presence," he argued. "I want to be by his side every step of the way." Fidelio was transferred to a specialized veterinary clinic, where an international team of specialists implemented an intensive treatment protocol. During the weeks that followed, daily updates on his health were eagerly awaited by people around the world. Sister Maria Consolata, whose own health had significantly weakened in recent months, insisted on visiting the dog daily, despite medical recommendations for her to rest. "He was there for all of us," she said simply. "Now it's our turn to be there for him." It was during one of these visits that the elderly sister witnessed a moment that many would call miraculous. Fidelio, until then listless due to the medication, suddenly lifted his head when she entered the room. His eyes, though still showing tiredness, seemed to light up. With a visible effort, he rose on his trembling paws and walked to her, resting his head in her lap when she sat down. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "There's much more love to give and receive in this world." As if understanding every word, Fidelio emitted a low sound, almost a sigh of agreement. From that day on, to the surprise of the medical team, his recovery accelerated significantly. 3 weeks later, Fidelio was strong enough to return to the Vatican. His arrival was greeted with a discreet but emotional celebration. Cardinal Bonfiglio, breaking another protocol, personally gave the animal a blessing in a small ceremony, attended only by those closest to the story. "May his loyalty continue to inspire us all to be worthy of the love we receive," the cardinal declared, in words that many interpreted as a reference not only to Fidelio, but also to the legacy of the Pope, whom the dog had loved so much. During his convalescence, a new discovery brought an additional dimension to the story. John Miller, a young Brazilian seminarian with an interest in historical archives, found during unrelated research a document written by Pope Francis himself a few days before his death by stroke on April 21, 2025. The document, a personal letter that apparently had never been sent, specifically mentioned Fidelio. "If something happens to me, I would like my faithful friend to find peace on my family's property, the small olive grove where I spent my childhood summers. He always showed a special love for open spaces, and I believe he could run freely there, as every living being deserves." Pope Francis's handwriting, though shaky, showed the special affection he had for his canine companion. The discovery caused dismay. The wishes expressed by the late pontiff had never been fulfilled. Instead, Fidelio had chosen his own form of mourning, his own expression of loyalty. When the document was officially presented to the papal household family, a new controversy arose. The closest relatives disputed the authenticity of the letter, arguing that the property mentioned had been sold years before, and that, in any case, they were not in a position to properly care for an animal. Pietro Bergoglio, although belonging to a distant branch of the family, publicly spoke against this position. "If the wish was for Fidelio to have space to run freely, we can honor this intention, even if the original property is no longer available, he declared in an interview. I have a small property farmhouse near Rome. I would be honored to offer this space as a home for Fidelio, allowing him to also maintain his visits to the Vatican. Pietro's proposal sparked an intense debate about the true meaning of loyalty. Would it be more respectful to follow strictly the written wishes, even if circumstances had changed, or to honor the spirit of the intention, adapting it to the current reality? Sister Maria Consolata, consulted on the matter, offered a perspective that surprised many. Perhaps we should ask Fidelio, she suggested with the simplicity that characterized her. He already made his choice once. Perhaps we should trust his wisdom again. The suggestion, initially seen as eccentric, gained momentum when Dr. Rossi, the veterinarian responsible for Fidelio's treatment, expressed support for the idea. Animals, especially those with strong emotional bonds like Fidelio, show clear preferences for places and people. Observing these preferences can indeed be the most compassionate approach. Thus, a unique experiment was proposed. Fidelio would be taken to visit Pietro Bergoglio's small property, Sarge farmhouse. His reaction to the place would be carefully observed, without pressure or expectation. Then he would return to the Vatican, where his usual routine would continue. On the appointed day, a small group accompanied Fidelio to the rural property. The dog, still recovering, but visibly stronger, curiously explored the sunny grounds with its ancient olive trees and winding streams. When he reached a small hill that offered a panoramic view of the landscape, Fidelio stopped, sat down, and observed the horizon for long minutes. He seems at peace here, Pietro commented, moved by the scene. Yes, but his heart is divided, Sister Maria Consolata replied, watching how the dog occasionally turned his head towards Rome, as if searching for the silhouette of the basilica on the distant horizon. In the months that followed, a unique solution was implemented. Fidelio would begin dividing his time between the Vatican and Pietro's small property, Shy's farmhouse. A small adapted van, affectionately nicknamed the Fidelio Mobile by journalists, transported the dog daily between the two locations. This solution, although logistically complex, seemed to fulfill both the late Pope's wish and the special bond Fidelio had established with his vigil site. The unusual routine soon became part of Roman folklore. Tourists mapped the van's schedule to try to catch a glimpse of the famous dog on his way to his country house. Local children even created a song about the dog who lives in two worlds. It was in the midst of this new normal that the event occurred that many would later describe as the culminating point of Fidelio's story. A year after his vigil began, during a special ceremony conducted by the new pope, who until then had maintained a respectful distance from the dog, something extraordinary happened. The ceremony, broadcast to millions of homes around the world, celebrated the canonization of 3 new saints. Fidelio was present, as had become common at important events, lying silently near the altar, discreetly accompanied by Sister Maria Consolata. At the most solemn moment of the celebration, when the new pontiff pronounced the official words of canonization, Fidelio suddenly stood up. Everyone present held their breath, fearing an inappropriate interruption. But what followed left the assembly in reverent silence. With slow, determined steps, Fidelio walked towards the new pope. There was no agitation in his movements, only a serene dignity that seemed to resonate with the solemnity of the moment. Upon reaching the pontiff's feet, the dog sat down calmly and extended his paw, as if in a formal greeting. The new pope, visibly moved, paused the ceremony. After a moment of hesitation, he bent down and accepted Fidelio's greeting. The audience, overcoming the initial shock, erupted in spontaneous applause. Tears flowed freely down the faces of cardinals and ordinary faithful. For many present, that moment symbolized more than a simple interaction between man and animal. It represented a passage, an acceptance perhaps, even a blessing, as if Fidelio, in his inexplicable wisdom, was finally acknowledging the continuity of the institution his beloved owner had led. The event inspired the new pope to implement an initiative that surprised the Catholic world. the ICELD creation of an official animal-assisted therapy program within the Vatican. If God has gifted us with these creatures capable of so much love and loyalty, he declared in his formal announcement, he surely intends for us to use this gift to alleviate the suffering of his most vulnerable children. The first phase of the program, named the Fidelio Initiative, focused on serving children with terminal illnesses and the elderly in social isolation. Specially trained therapy dogs, accompanied by volunteers and healthcare professionals, began visiting hospitals and nursing homes throughout Italy, bringing comfort and moments of joy to those in situations of suffering. Fidelio became the unofficial ambassador of the initiative. His naturally gentle and intuitive behavior made him a natural therapist. Children who had remained silent for months after traumas smiled and spoke in the presence of the golden dog. Elderly people with advanced dementia showed moments of surprising lucidity when they stroked his soft fur. Science finally began to take an interest in the Fidelio phenomenon. An international team of animal behavior specialists requested permission to study the dog, hoping to better understand the mechanisms behind his extraordinary story. After months of careful observation and detailed analysis, the scientists reached a fascinating discovery. Fidelio's behavior seemed to be linked to a specific olfactory stimulus. The incense used exclusively in ceremonies presided over by the old pope contained a particular combination of essences, including a rare resin produced by monks from an isolated monastery in the Italian Alps. Dogs have an olfactory capacity up to 100,000 times more potent than humans, explained Dr. Sophia Chen, leader of the research team, at a press conference. Our hypothesis is that Fidelio created a neurological association between this specific aroma and his bond with the late pontiff. His vigil can be interpreted as a continuous search for this sensory stimulus that represented security and affection. The discovery, far from diminishing the symbolism of Fidelio's story, opened up fascinating new discussions about the intersection between science and faith. Theologians and scientists gathered in a series of interreligious conferences to debate questions about animal consciousness, the nature of emotional attachment, and how different spiritual traditions interpret such phenomena. Understanding the biological mechanisms behind Fidelio's behavior does not make his loyalty less significant, argued Rabbi David Goldstein during one of these meetings. After all, we humans are also biological creatures, and our highest feelings, love, compassion, loyalty, also have neurological bases. The question is not whether there is a scientific explanation, but the meaning we attribute to that expression of bond. While these academic discussions unfolded, Fidelio's extraordinary life continued its course. Sister Maria Consolata, now 81 and with increasingly fragile health, had to leave her duties at the Vatican. She was transferred to a nearby convent where she could receive the medical care her condition required. To no one's surprise who knew the story well, Fidelio began dividing his time even more. In addition to visits to the Vatican and Pietro's small property farmhouse, he now made regular visits to the elderly sister's room. Convent staff reported how the dog remained for hours at the foot of the sister's bed, as if standing guard, leaving only for his basic needs. He does for me what he did for the Holy Father, the sister confided to a colleague, tears in her. He brings comfort on the final journey. He's an angel with paws. When news reached the Vatican that Sister Maria Consolata's health had significantly deteriorated, the new pope did something unprecedented. He personally visited the convent to administer the last sacraments, accompanied by Fidelio. The scene captured in a discreet photograph by a novice became instantly iconic. The pontiff on one side of the bed, the golden dog on the other, and between them, the elderly sister smiling serenely, her wrinkled hands touching both in a perfect triangle of connection. 3 days later, Sister Maria Consolata passed away peacefully in her sleep. Fidelio, who had remained by her side until the end, once again demonstrated behavior that defied conventional explanations. After her passing, he walked to the small chapel of the convent and lay down silently before the altar, remaining motionless For hours. The sister's funeral, who in life had been a modest and discreet figure, attracted a surprising crowd. In addition to the religious community, ordinary people came who had been touched by the story of her dedication to Fidelio. The dog himself followed the funeral procession with a dignity that impressed everyone. After 2 full years since the beginning of his extraordinary journey, Fidelio had become much more than a symbol of canine loyalty. He represented something deeply human, the ability to adapt without abandoning the bonds of the past, to find new purposes without betraying old loyalties. It was during a special pilgrimage to the late Pope's hometown, organized to mark the anniversary of his death, that what many considered the final chapter of this extraordinary story occurred. Fidelio, who had been brought to the event at the special request of the organizers, momentarily escaped from his caregivers during a break in the procession. Witnesses reported seeing the dog running determinedly through narrow alleys, as if following a map visible only to him. When they finally caught up with him, Fidelio was sitting patiently in front of a small rural chapel, almost hidden among ancient trees. The chapel, it was later discovered, had been a personal refuge for the late pontiff during his youth. It was a place rarely mentioned in official biographies, known only to a few close confidants. Inside the simple and dusty interior of the small sanctuary, guided by Fidelio's persistent behavior, those present discovered a wooden box carefully hidden under a loose floorboard. Inside, they found some personal belongings of the late Pope, including a rosary that, according to accounts from his closest assistants, he used in his most intimate private prayers. How Fidelio had found that place, how he had known about the hidden box, these questions would remain unanswered. For skeptics, it could have been mere chance, perhaps his keen sense of smell, detecting the familiar scent on objects frequently handled by his former owner. For others, it was the final proof of a connection that transcended conventional explanations. Pope Francis's rosary was later placed on display in the Vatican, alongside a bronze statue of Fidelio, immortalizing the extraordinary story that had captured the world's imagination. The statue, created by a renowned Italian sculptor, depicted the dog in his characteristic vigil posture, sitting, attentive, looking at the horizon with an expression that mixed expectation and serenity. At the base of the sculpture, a bronze plaque recorded the words, "Fidelio, faithful friend of Pope Francis," an example of love that transcends time. Today, Fidelio continues to serve as a canine therapist in the program he helped inspire. His days are filled with visits to hospitals and nursing homes, where his gentle presence brings comfort to people in moments of pain and loneliness. He still maintains his routine of visits to the Vatican, although his vigil has transformed into something different, no longer a painful wait for the return of Pope Francis, but a presence that honors the memory of the Argentine pontiff without being tied to the past. Pietro Bergoglio, now considered Fidelio's official owner, summarizes the extraordinary journey in simple words. He taught us that true love remains. It doesn't stagnate, it doesn't refuse to change. It transforms, adapts, finds new ways to express itself. But in its essence, it never truly says goodbye. Visitors to the Vatican often report a special moment at dusk, when the light of the setting sun bathes the basilica in golden tones. It is possible to see, they say, the silhouette of a dog sitting calmly in the square, looking at the main balcony. For a few instants, it seems as if time goes back, as if nothing has changed. Then, gently, Fidelio gets up and walks towards his new purpose, carrying with him the legacy of a love that, by transforming, became eternal. This is the story of Fidelio, the dog who didn't want to say goodbye. A story about how sometimes the refusal to accept goodbye can open doors to new beginnings. A story that, like Fidelio himself, continues inspiring people around the world to recognize the beauty and power of the bonds we form with humans, with animals, with the divine, and how these bonds, when true, transcend even the final separation.